Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Labor and Public Employees Task Force to Study Cancer Relief Benefits for Firefighters. Today is Tuesday, February the 1st, and I will convene this meeting at 12:05 p.m. And I will open the floor for any welcoming remarks. Senator Kushner, you have the floor.
Thank you, Representative Porter. It's good to be here with all of you again today to talk about this important issue. And it's good to see all of those of you on the task force, and to all those that are listening in, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. I actually don't see any of our ranking members. Devin, I do see Greg Hannon on from the House. Do we have any of our ranking members there, Devin?
We do not.
We do not. Okay. I'm actually going to give it a few minutes because I thought we had all our members on. So I'm just going to give them a couple of more minutes to join in, if that's okay with you all. All right. There's Representative Aurora coming in. Representative Aurora, welcome. I have just given Senator Kushner the floor for her welcoming remarks, and I'd like to do the same for you. So you have the floor at this time, sir.
Oh, thank you very much, and Madam Chair, and I look for and welcome to all participating, both on the panel as well as from the public. And I look forward to the discussions and our conclusions on this task force. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I do believe that is all of the elected officials we have at this time. So we'll go ahead on to Roman number 3, which is the discussion of the final recommendations. And we will get started. We're going over that. And we will start with the prevention and early detection. You all should have received this from Ryan earlier today. And we'll talk about the prevention methods should become standard practice and should be included in the training and education that a firefighter in Connecticut receives. Fire departments should also enact best practices and procedures that help mitigate the risk of these illnesses from occurring. Lowering the rates of these cancers occurring and catching them earlier will ultimately save lives. The task force recommends that OSHA adopt and create their own best practices for preventing firefighter cancers based upon the latest International Association of Firefighters recommendations, and that these best practices are implemented and practiced by all fire departments in Connecticut. There's actually 11 that we'll go through quickly, and then I will, I think the best way to do this is as we go through each subsection, just to open the floor for questions, comments, and further recommendations. So the first one is full protective equipment. The PPE must be worn throughout the entire incident, including SCBA during salvage and overhaul, and that is a self-contained breathing apparatus for those watching and do not know this alphabet soup. Number 2 is a second hood should be provided to all entry certified personnel in the department. Number 3, following exit from the IDLH, which is immediately dangerous to life or death, and while still on air, you should begin immediate gross decon of PPE regardless of weather. PPE should be then placed into a sealed plastic bag and placed in an exterior compartment of the rig, or if responding in POVs, placed in a large storage tote, thus keeping the off-gassing PPE away from passengers and self. Number 4, after completion of gross decon procedures is discussed above, and while still on the scene, the exposed area of the body, neck, face, arms, and hands should be wiped off immediately using wipes, which must be carried on all apparatus. Use the wipes to remove as much soot as possible from the head, neck, jaw, throat, underarms, and hands immediately. Number 5, change your clothes and wash them after exposure to products of combustion or other contaminants. Do this as soon as possible and/or isolate in a trash bag until washing is available. Number 6, shower as soon as possible after being exposed to products of combustion or other contaminants. quote unquote, shower within the hour. Number 7, all PPE must be prohibited in areas outside the apparatus floor. And the examples given are kitchen, sleeping areas, etc., and never in the household. Number 8, wipes or soap and water should also be used to decontaminate and clean apparatus seats. SCVA and interior crew are regularly, especially at the incidents where personnel were exposed to products of combustion. Number 9, get an annual physical, as early detection is the key to survival. NFP, which is National Volunteer Firefighter Council, 1582 details the necessary components of firefighter physicals and should be followed by all practitioners. Number 10, tobacco products of any variety, including dip and e-cigarettes, should never be used at any time on or after duty. And the last one listed here under this subsection is fully document all fire or chemical exposure on incident reports and personal exposure reports. So that's what we're recommending under the prevention and early detection. And I will go ahead and open the floor to the members for comments and questions. Okay, yes, Representative Aurora, followed by Bob Smith.
Madam Chair, this is the first time I'm seeing this list. Who has suggested this list? And, you know, has there been any discussion or consolidation of various ideas? And is this a suggestion? And is there, you know, this is just coming as a surprise because this is very important stuff. And can you shed some more light on it?
Yes, these are recommendations that we're making according to conversations that we've had on this task force. This time today will be allotted for that discussion, open to comments, suggestions, and we will then, you'll have time to kind of go over all this the next few days. And we're looking to reconvene next week, so that we can finalize the recommendations, Representative Aurora.
No, Madam Chair, I meant just the specific. Yeah, I'm going through. I just got the list as well. I was just, I printed them out and was going through them. The one with regard to prevention, are these basically, have we taken input from various sources, or is this, because this is the first time I'm seeing a list of, we have discussed some preventive measures in the past. I think it's also the modality. Are we suggesting that the legislator really mandate these suggestions, or these are the best practices which we are suggesting, and why these versus some others? Are these being suggested by the Firefighters Association? How have we come about this set of 9 or 10 ideas which you just put in, which I just see in the list in our task force finding?
Yes, there were 11 for this prevention and early detection, and I do see my co-chair waving at me, so I'm going to allow her to have the floor at this time. Senator Kushner?
Yes, I just wanted to point out that these, Representative Aurora, these came to us through a member of the task force. And if you remember, we got the lavender report that was provided to us. And I'm sorry, I think it was maybe Von Dumas, who I don't see here today. Oh, yes, you're here, Von. I think you may have sent that to us, but I could be wrong. Oh, it was Bill Adamson. He's waving his hand. I knew it was one of you guys who, so we were given that report, and these were taken from that report. And I think the discussion in the past in the task force has been that we wanted to underscore the importance of mandating preventative measures, because, you know, our interest as a state and as a society would be to, you know, significantly reduce the number of people who get cancer. And we know these from that report, these are the measures that are effective. There may be others, there may be more, there may be, you know, I know Bob Smith is a health and safety guy for the firefighters, and he may have something to add on it, but these were all taken from that report that the committee, that all of us got at the beginning of this process.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. And I'll just add that, you know, that is the case. And not only that, these are some of the practices that are currently being used by fire departments today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That was my question, where we got them from. I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome, Representative Aurora. Bob Smith, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Two things, Madam Chair. I did not receive any of the materials for the meeting today. They were forwarded to me by Brother Hart late last night. So for some reason or another, I might have been left off the email. So I'd just like to see if we can get that corrected. That would be good. And my question would be, I think this list is a great start to protecting firefighters. I just was curious, as it's been run by the chiefs and members of CCM, to see if that's something they would be in agreement with.
Actually, we have not ran this through any of them yet because we're still going through the process of determining what the final recommendations will be.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Senator Kushner.
And I just want to add that, if we adopt these recommendations, and there will be lots of process after we adopt our recommendations, because it would entail, before it becomes statutory, it would entail public hearings, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of conversation with CCM and with the chiefs.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. All right, I don't see any other hands raised for this subsection, so we will go on to the next subsection, which is the data collection and reporting. And actually, before I go on, I do see that Mr. Addison, Bill Addison, you have the floor, sir. You're muted.
Sorry about that. No, it's the only other one that I thought might have been added with the recommendation that they have 2 sets of turnout gear, at least for those firehouses that have a high volume of calls, that if you have to put on your gear that's already been exposed to toxic chemicals, ideally you would not want to have to put that on again before it's been cleaned.
Absolutely, and that definitely was an oversight, because I do remember that, and I thought that was in here, but it's not. So we can certainly add that to this list, and I've actually put it as number 12, 2 sets of turnout gear.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Were there any other suggestions or recommendations that anyone wanted to give while we're under prevention and early detection? All right, seeing none, we will go ahead and move on to the data collection and reporting. The task force finds that there are holes in the data currently available. This is in part due to the lack of standardization of reporting procedures and documentation of exposures. So the task force is recommending that one standardized exposure form is created and used statewide to better create documentation of firefighters' exposures to carcinogens over their career. The exact number of firefighters currently battling the line of duty cancers in Connecticut is unknown. So to better understand the scope of these illnesses in firefighters in Connecticut, the task force is also recommending the adoption of standardized reporting procedure for when a firefighter is diagnosed with a cancer that is suspected to be caused from the line of duty work. And that I will open up now for discussion on the data collection. And I do see Senator Kushner has her hand up. So we will start with you, Madam Chair, you have the floor.
I just wanted to point out that we did receive 2 different exposure forms. One from, now am I correct, was that from Mr. Dumas, I believe? And we also received one from
Hart.
UPSA. And so I think, those have been sent to you, and we can look at those. Make sure that, we adopt an exposure form that will give us the greatest amount of information so that we can be sure that we're documenting the incidents. So we have some to look at both of those.
Okay, and I just want to,
we might even want to check in during the process of hearings. We could check in with ConOSHA and make sure that they take a look at this as well.
yes. And I just want to check in with, is Devin still with us? Yes. I just want to make sure, Devin, that Mr. Smith has all the documents.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so there was nothing more on that from the task force members. So we will move on. And next we have the rebuttable presumption piece of this. So I'm sorry.
It's Vaughn, if I can make one statement on the exposure forms.
Absolutely.
The one that I had forwarded off, I sent to Jeff Morissette at the Commission of Fire Prevention and Control and the president of the Connecticut State Firefighters Association, and they're both in agreement with it. We'd like to put a couple of logos on top, one from the Commission of Fire Prevention and Control, one from Connecticut State Fire Association. But the repository, who receives them and who tracks them, is an important part of that. And with the other documents that I had forwarded, there is also past history. You can see on the bottom the number of exposure forms that have been sent in to us over the last 3 years is on the bottom as well. We maintain those. So I'm just, along with the exposure form, I think there needs to be one repository that it can go to for tracking when there is an incident. I think that should be the Connecticut State Firefighters Association, being that we are the ones that are vetting the claims.
Okay, and we did have discussion around this as well. And Senator Kushner, you can feel free to weigh in, but we talked about ConOSHA being a central database for storing this information. We're certainly open to the conversation of Connecticut State Firefighters Association. But like I said, I will allow my co-chair to weigh in on this at this time.
Well, I think that I would like to see ConOSHA involved here because I feel like they have, they're devoted to determining health and safety practices in the workplace. And so certainly I believe they would be a good resource for all of us, but I don't have any objection to it also going, to additional organizations as appropriate, such as the Connecticut State Firefighters Association. So, and I think in terms of the form, the one thing I was concerned about when I saw the form was I was concerned that the form you gave us, Mr. Dumas, could have greater detail on it so that we're sure that we're getting enough information to really make sure, and also making it as uniform as possible. Whenever you give people forms to fill out, to be able to really track data, you need to limit the responses as much as you can. I mean, it's great to have a narrative, but it's also important to have drop downs so that we're getting consistent reporting so that information can actually be analyzed and tracked effectively. And so I think that the form still needs some work to be a product that we could recommend. But in terms of the repository, I think we ought to think big and say, ConOSHA being a state organization, official agency of the government with the repository. And then, if we have additional places where it'd be useful, I don't know if the union thinks it would be useful to get it as well. We can certainly make sure that that's part of it as well. So I like that idea.
Correct. The form that I submitted does have drop downs. If you download it as a PDF, there is drop downs for the different categories. And like I said, it was vetted. Jeff Morissette at the commission, he didn't have any additional things, and he believes that the data that's being collected on that with the drop downs was sufficient. It's still in draft form, so that's why it went to the committee. If there's anything else that needs to be added to the drop downs or any other data that they want to see collected, we can add it to that form as well.
Thank you. Was that it for you, Senator Kushner? Okay, next up we have Representative Aurora. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to echo Senator Kushner's remarks about the data collection. I think it's an excellent idea. And I do agree that ConOSHA, a central repository from the state would really work well. We need to collect all the information possible. And I also agree with Senator Kushner's suggestion that we take more input and kind of really make sure that that it's all inclusive, has the most data possible, because really keeping this data together over a long period of time is extremely important. And I think it's should be a central part of our recommendation. So thank you very much. And I just am very supportive of all those ideas.
Thank you, Representative Aurora. Up next, we have Bright Johnson.
Hi, just a quick clarifying question. The standardized reporting procedure, this would include for volunteer firefighters as well, correct?
Yes, that is correct, sir.
Great, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Up next.
If I could say one I really, really appreciate all of the work that's gone into this. I am so impressed with every member of this work group. Thank you for doing this, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. You're welcome. Rick Hart, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Representative Porter. As far as the exposure report form, I did look at the one offered up by Vaughn, and we do need detail because if we are looking at a workers' comp case, the more detail that can be provided and documented, the better for the members that are going to be filing a claim. You know, in some of the instances, as far as exposure type, they're pretty much the same, but it's important to document what the person's doing as far as a standardized form. You're asking somebody to be subjective in a narrative when you ask somebody to write something, and then one of the questions is why you feel the firefighters might have complications based on hazardous materials that you've been exposed to. That's extremely subjective, as well as people may not know as to what is going to be causing complications. So I think if we leave it to what the person was doing at the time of the incident, we also have to make sure that when we wrote the statute for the Cancer Relief Fund, we were very narrow in the scope of who would be covered under this, as far as being OSHA 1910-154 and 1910-132 certified, which is important because on a fire scene, depending on where you are, you could have 50 people there, but not all 50 are involved in the actual fire suppression aspect of being exposed to the products of combustion. And we did that so that we wouldn't have claims from someone that was parked at the end of the street supplying water and had nothing to do with the fire suppression aspect. So that documentation is extremely important. And if we have it in a standardized form where in the UPFFA form, it says length of exposure by fire stage and activity, it lists all of the fire stages where people would be exposed to, so that we can really document what is going on. And then we kind of put in symptoms, because if somebody had symptoms on scene, if they start coughing or feel nauseous or dizzy or whatever, we can attribute that to being exposed to carbon monoxide, which means they had their mask off during overhaul and they're exposing themselves to a greater chance of being diagnosed with cancer down the road. So I think more detail is required than the other form provides. And I think we have to keep, it has to be extremely objective, especially when we do a file for a workers' comp claim. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Bob Smith, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Representative Porter. I also have not seen the form that Mr. Dumas is referring to, his exposure forms. That would be helpful for me to see that and the data was collected to give some further comment.
Thank you for that notation. And I'm sure Devin is getting that to you as I speak.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right.
I'm sorry, one more.
Yes.
One more. No. I didn't get the form that Rick had supplied in an email. I think I agree 100% with what he's saying as far as narrowing down the exposure times and who's definitely involved. If he has a better way of doing that, I think it sounds like the two documents merged could be one that would benefit the exposure reporting piece of this. So if I get that, I can probably take that and make that a drop down as well into the form. We can merge the two and make a decision after that's done.
Thank you. That sounds like a good idea, and I'm sure that that information is forthcoming to you as well. And I will leave that for you and Rick to kind of bring together for us, since you both have expertise and that's your wheelhouse. I don't see any further hands for this subsection.
Robin,
Yes.
I'm sorry, Representative Porter, Madam Chair. We might want to add Bob to that group, Bob Smith, because I know that is his work for the union. So doing health and safety work. So I think that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that, Senator Kushner. So that would be Rick Hart, Von Dumas, and Bob Smith to work on the what we're coming up for data collection. All right, no hands. So next up, we have the rebuttable presumption, and we are suggesting that we adopt legislation that establishes a rebuttable presumption for professional firefighters bringing a workers' compensation claim for cancer caused by line of duty work and exposures. And under that, we have the following bullets to outline that we codify into law which cancers are covered by the rebuttable presumption. And that is something that we are looking to get a list from Rick Hart on. It is my understanding, and Senator Kushner's as well, that there are some cancers that are already outlined, and we have them listed in the next bullet. So currently, these are the following cancers that are identified as most prevalent in firefighters according to NIOSH. And that's testicle cancer, mesothelioma, multiple myeloma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, skin cancer, malignant myeloma, brain cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer, leukemia, bladder cancer, breast cancer, esophageal cancer, lung cancer, and kidney cancer. Additionally, any other cancers identified by the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, aka NIOSH, are to be considered covered by the rebuttable presumption. The fire departments are to provide coverage for professional firefighters through workers' comp, or fire departments may opt out of workers' comp coverage if they cover their professional firefighters through private insurance for comparable benefits. We will put into statute that the process by which private insurance processes the claim of a claimant must mirror or be better than the rebuttable presumption used in professional firefighters workers' comp claims. Amending current law to prevent firefighters from forfeiting their right to collect workers' comp if they receive benefits or wage replacement from the firefighters' cancer fund. And then additionally, amending current rules to allow the family, dependents of a deceased firefighter to continue to receive the wage replacement benefits for a determined period of time. And we're still trying to determine what that time looks like. So that is what we have outlined so far as recommendations for the rebuttable presumption. And I will open the floor now for comments and questions, starting with Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do want to point out that we had, I think, very good discussion and recommendations from a number of the task force members. And I think what we found was interesting was that there is a question about affordability. And clearly, when it comes to protecting firefighters, we all agree it's our obligation as a state and as municipalities have the obligation to take care of firefighters who contract cancer. And so there's agreement on that. How to do it was the question. So I think the recommendation that we put together was a mix and match, that a municipality could participate in the workers' comp system with a rebuttable presumption for those cancers that Representative Porter enumerated. And that list, by the way, could be expanded if there were studies that show other cancers also have a high incidence among firefighters. But that they could also, a municipality could also opt for private insurance that would provide comparable benefits to workers' comp. And so I think that allows municipalities a bit of flexibility in choosing what works best for their workforce. And so, I do think that we are fully aware that we have not yet addressed the issue of volunteer firefighters that's been raised here, an important issue, and we'll come to that later in the recommendation. But at least as a starting point, this appears to meet our responsibility. And so I want to thank all the presenters that really helped us understand the pros and cons of the various approaches. I do want to remind Mr. Dumas, I had asked, I think we as a task force asked for a copy of the application form that you will be using for applicants for the fund as it stands now. Under current statute, I believe it goes into effect this month or in February. And so if you have a copy of the application form, I think the task force would also like to have that on the record, so we're fully informed about that.
I did email those. I hit reply all on that, and I believe it went out about 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
So you should-
Devin, if you could look for that and bump it up to the top of our inbox, that would be great.
Thank you, Senator Kushner, and thank you, Mr. Dumas. Up next, we have Rick Hart.
Yeah, thank you, Chairwoman Porter. One question, two questions I have. And I think the first one, I'll direct this to our workers' comp experts. If I'm not mistaken, as far as the volunteers are concerned, as soon as they respond to an incident, they become employees of the town under their workers' comp coverage. So I think that if I'm mistaken, then I apologize, but I believe they become they are covered under the workers' comp insurance policies from the municipalities where they respond from. Is that correct, to your best understanding?
Workers' comp.
Yes, that's my
That-
understanding.
Okay. Did you hear that, Rick?
Yeah, so that would probably solve some of this, issue as far as workers' comp coverage for volunteers. The other thing, and I know the process, and I hate having to go to judiciary because that's well, never mind. But what is to ensure that a municipality, if they opt out of the workers' comp coverage, what teeth do we have to ensure that they take out a private insurance policy to cover the firefighters? I mean, it's, is there a slap on the hand? Can you withhold municipal funding because they don't do that? I mean, I just don't know what we can do to enforce it.
There are several options, and I do see Senator Kushner's hand up, so I will give her the floor.
I think that's an important point. We would have to have an enforcement mechanism, but we could make it a private right of action that someone could go into court if a city wasn't providing that insurance that was comparable. So it wouldn't burden any state agency, and it would have, if you do it as a private right of action, I believe from other conversations I've had about other bills, it would also carry some penalties, could potentially carry penalties that would be a deterrent to any municipality saying they have the private insurance and not carrying it. So I think there are ways to give it teeth.
I agree, and I think that's something that we can discuss between now and the finalization of the recommendations. Mr. Adamson, you have the floor, sir. You are muted.
Hi, thank you. Some observations. The establishment of rebuttable presumption, and I'm sure it's based on what was outlined in the past meeting. That has 5 criteria. And my view is that means about 90% of the career firefighters will meet that criteria, which means, de facto, it's really a strict liability for those firefighters because it's going to cover every cancer that's listed, the 15 or 16 you've got here. which tells me that the costs are going to be in the area that I've outlined in the past, a significant increase in cost over current comp rates. And I guess I'm not understanding why we'd be recommending workers' comp when a much less expensive that would provide the same benefits when the cost of comp is fivefold. And particularly when there's no mention of the document cost, and the entities who are deciding on opt-out are not going to be briefed on the cost differential, and they may not understand when they're making it, because they may decide if they have a deductible program, oh, well, that's fine, we'll just stick with comp, not recognizing the exposures they have that may not come for years, because I've seen that before. So I'm struggling with the recommendation here.
Okay, I think that we came to the conclusion with the workers' comp versus giving the option for employers if they wanted to have private insurance. The workers' comp is what we've heard. We've talked about that here. And I'm not sure, and I'll let Senator Kushner weigh in on this, but we can certainly check to see what the price differences are. I mean, you definitely have outlined in what you presented what it would be even if we raised it to, I believe, $500,000 it was, that it would be an additional, I think the 75,000 was 60, and if you did the additional, it was another 340. Is that correct?
Right, yeah. It comes out to, with the disability, about 500 some dollars per firefighter at the $500,000 death benefit level. And as you'd asked, was that enough? So I went and checked statistics, and that's in line with what the average death benefit payment's been in Connecticut the last 11 years.
Yes, and I do appreciate that when I saw that. Senator Kushner, did you want to respond to Mr. Adamson?
I see Representative Aurora has his hand up, but I have something to say, but I'll wait until we hear from Representative Aurora.
Okay, I'm just trying to make sure that we finish up with Mr. Adamson before I go on to the next person. You're muted. I'm gonna get everybody a t-shirt that says you're muted. She's still muted, so I'm gonna go ahead to Representative Aurora and we'll come back to Senator Kushner. Oh.
Madam Chair, actually, my question was, I have a clarification on how this is written, because the way I see it, read it, or the suggestion or the recommendation, is that the worker comps legislation be amended to, or we amend the law to say that worker comps should, for cancer caused by line of duty, will have a rebuttable presumption embedded in it. Now, the optionality, or the fire department's option to not have worker comp at all, right? I'm not understanding. I think it's the state of Connecticut's law that every employer should have workers' comp. And, it doesn't matter whether you want it or not, and are we, because for pulling your back or whatsoever they might be. And if the workers' comp law already has a cancer rebuttable presumption, I would assume that, it will apply in a sense that nobody would, I'm not understanding under this suggestion, what are they opting out of, or what is the fire department saying that we will not take worker compensation? They still have to buy workers' comp, period. And so what they can say is, well, there's a workers' comp I'm buying into, but however, within the workers' comp contract, I can say no to the rebuttable presumption in specific, because everything else in the workers' comp is going to apply. And then, and it will also apply to every volunteer as well, because in this case, every volunteer, as I think Rick mentioned, and I would presume that, anybody who's doing any work for you, whether it is a volunteer or as is covered under some workers' comp, should they get injured. So now, really, are we saying that we're going to increase the cost by a magnitude of hundreds of millions? Because, we were discussing under, or let me kind of first go step by step. The first step here is, how is this optionality work, considering that the law will in itself be amended to say that workers' comp will include for professional firefighters a rebuttable presumption? And I think maybe perhaps it's a question for David or whosoever has the expertise on this, because the way I read it is just the way I mentioned.
I see Mr. Morrissey raising his hand. If you wanted to respond, you have the floor. You just need to unmute. You're muted.
How's that?
Much better.
Okay, thank you. Actually, one of the first questions I had, and I think I've asked this before, and this doesn't apply necessarily to retirees or for death benefits, but at least as to the active firefighters, I've mentioned before that I think every paid fire department has pretty good health insurance. So these costs, this increased cost, I'm assuming that includes medical coverage as well. And if there was some hybrid of a workers' comp law, which was indemnity only, maybe with some exceptions, how much of an increase would there be? In other words, group insurance is paying for the cancer anyways. Why not let them continue to pay for the cancer? Again, probably no help to the volunteers, and there may be situations when people retire, they don't get health insurance. I just think that would be a dramatic decrease in this cost projection. And as to how the expense would increase with a rebuttable presumption, my suggestion is perhaps look at the rebuttable presumption that still exists for many state hazardous duty employees, such as state police, for example. They have a rebuttable presumption as to hypertension and heart disease. Now, the presumption can be rebutted. There's no limit to the things that can be raised to rebut those presumptions, whereas the current version of the special act with that fund, I think, limits it simply to you can't be a smoker or have been a smoker. But I assume there's other risk factors for cancer. I don't know how expansive you want to be as far as what can or cannot be raised as an expense. But I suspect that the cost to the state of Connecticut for these rebuttable presumption claims is not that high, because usually, I'm not going to say all, but many of them can be rebutted, as I said before, because the person's a smoker, they're overweight, they have a family history, and so on and so on. So I just don't know that these cost projections are quite accurate with the different types of things that are being discussed here.
Thank you for that response. And I know we have a couple of more hands went up, but I do see Senator Kushner. So
Madam Chair, may I interrupt here? Because the question which I asked perhaps wasn't really the question Attorney Morrissey addressed. The question I asked here was, how does this work? How can someone get out of the opt-out? Because one of the things I heard Senator Kushner explained was this is a hybrid kind of approach that fire departments who are to provide coverage through workers' comp, or they may opt out of the workers' comp coverage. That was my question. How do you opt out of workers' comp coverage or from the rebuttable presumption?
Senator Kushner, thank you.
I do believe we, as a legislature, can establish that. And, I base this on logic more than technical understanding, because I'm not a lawyer and haven't worked extensively with this. But logically speaking, we actually passed a law in 2016 and 2017 that created the Cancer Relief Fund. And it says in there that if you accept benefits from that fund, you are no longer eligible for benefits under workers' comp. So I don't think that that is an issue. I think that can be resolved. But, we can certainly go to OLR and to our, our LCO. We won't we won't be proposing something that we're not allowed to do under law. But I think we have that. I think we as a legislature have that authority to create that situation. I think the question asked earlier about how do we enforce it is a legitimate question, because if we're going to private insurance, how do we make sure that that is living up to the requirements of the statute? But I think that can be addressed as well.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, Senator Kushner, for the clarification. I'm not a lawyer either, to your point, but this looks really tricky, because in any contract, I've done enough business to understand, in any contract, either you're subject to something or you're not subject to something. It's a term of a contract. Either we do make it rebuttable, there's a rebuttable presumption, or we don't, because the premiums will depend upon that, right? And so if we basically say that under workers' compensation, there will be a rebuttable compensation, a rebuttable presumption for firefighters, in which case, we do get the entire cost structure to change. And just as we said, that this is a really poor solution in terms of costs, and we're going to get significant pushback from a CCM, from our municipalities. And to suggest something which is legally so undefined seems very risky to me. And then there's also the question of whatever you would suggest applies then to the volunteers as well. So I'm really not clear why we would throw a suggestion which would throw everything in a legal limbo.
I don't think it would be legal limbo, but I'm going to digress and I'm going to move on to Mr. Drapo. I'm sorry, actually, I'm showing that Mr. Adamson had his hand up first. Is that correct?
Yeah, but I was going to respond to Mr. Morrissey's comment about rating, but I think you want to deal the other issue first.
Yes, thank you. So back to you, Mr. Drapo. Sorry.
Okay. A couple of things.
Mm-hmm.
One is that I think we need to, kind of what Attorney Morrissey was saying, I think we need to allow municipalities to require firefighters to use their health insurance. I don't think that should be a cost of the workers' comp system. It's already by case law allowed in the heart and hypertension cases. The other thing is that a lot of, in terms of the complications of opting in or opting out, we already have in the comp system an opt-in, opt-out system for owners of businesses, where owners, it used to be years ago, they were presumed to be that they had opted in. Now they used to be presumed that they had opted out. Now they're presumed to be opted in. And there's a form you actually submit to the commission identifying whether you're opting in or opting out of coverage. So I'm not really seeing that that's going to be a complicated process. I see where you're getting at is who's going to determine whether the private insurance that has been purchased is equal to the comp coverage that is being provided under the statute. And to me, that would be the tricky part. But again, there's someone that is responsible for making that determination. So the other thing I want to bring up that I brought up a couple of times is that workers' compensation benefits are not taxable to the person who is receiving those benefits. And so when we're looking at how efficient a system is, if we're taking money and it's just passing through a percentage of it is just passing through a firefighter and then going to the federal government as taxes, that to me is an inefficiency that we have to acknowledge.
Thank you. And just listening to you, and I mean, Senator Kushner, you can weigh in on this. I'm thinking about what he just said, how we do this. I mean, we have something similar with the paid family medical leave that we did, where if they decide to opt out, they have to have coverage that is comparable or at least comparable to what the paid family medical leave. So we have ideas of where we can firm this up. And as Senator Kushner said, I think we do have the legislative power and authority to do that.
If I would, might have a comment for.
I think, excuse me, I wanted to respond, and
Yes,
I know,
please.
so if that's okay. Yeah, I think that the question that was just raised about taxes is an important one, because we are talking about income replacement. And so I think that is something we ought to think about seriously. And I don't know if Mr. Adamson can address that, because he's the one that's had the most experience with private insurance. And maybe you have some ideas or suggestions about how that would be addressed, because that is, that could be a burden on families that they wouldn't otherwise face. I'm really interested, Mr. Drapeau, and I always think I'm saying your name wrong, so I apologize. But I do think that I was curious about the, and actually had asked some questions about the health insurance and whether or not that could be taken out of workers' comp, because most career fire departments career firefighters have pretty good medical insurance. I had thought that was not possible, that the private insurer could sue workers' comp if we didn't, replace the benefit. But if we already did that for the hypertension bill, then that's really reassuring, because I think that's really important in bringing down the cost and something that we would want to do. So, I think there are a lot of options here. I still like the idea. I want to figure out that tax piece, but I like the idea of the option, because I think Mr. Adamson, raised some concerns about cost. And if the cost can be reduced for a municipality by doing a private insurance instead of workers' comp, I don't think we would have a problem with that. We just want to make sure the firefighter is taken care of, in fact, they would be under workers' comp. And so, I liked the idea of the option because then we could address concerns for either side. I do think that I do believe Representative Aurora raised a concern that the municipality wouldn't know the cost, or they wouldn't know the premium amounts. I think, if I'm correct, that the premium amounts that a municipality would pay is geared toward the experience that they have. So you don't project the premium up front, you actually pay back workers' comp when you've used it. That's my understanding. And so I think that issue is a non-issue, but the question of whether or not municipalities would be well-versed in which is the better option for them, I'm at least for the larger municipalities and even the small ones in my own district, I find that the smallest town I have has got like 3,000 people living there, and they are pretty determined to get their municipal government really digs in and finds out what's best for the municipality, even if they're very small. And so I think that option might be appealing to some of the municipalities. So that was why we had encouraged, an either or situation. But I understand we have to make sure that it's enforceable.
Representative Aurora?
No, I will leave it there, because I do feel there is an element, there's an element of program structure here where I understand that workers' comp can be, for many of our municipalities, self-insured. I think that's where the disconnect earlier was from what I was saying, that but the disconnect still exists, that workers' comp under the Connecticut law needs to be covered for everyone. And so if the municipality buys additional insurance coverage for, let's say, for the specific cancer benefits, that doesn't really absolve them for coverage for regular workers' comp, let's say, for somebody, pulling their back, right? Mm-hmm. They still have to be covered. Now, either we're saying, well, they're going to have to buy that coverage as well, in case they want to get out of the disability kind of coverage. So not, and I'm seeing Senator Kushner say, no, obviously they still are subject to the coverage. So what I'm hearing is that the way this would be written is, you do not have the workers' comp is not rebuttable if you have does not have a rebuttable presumption, because nobody can stop anybody from bringing a case of cancer against workers' compensation. It's just it doesn't get approved.
Senator Kushner?
Yeah, this is very specific to this specific list of cancers, and the rebuttable presumption in workers' comp, just like for heart and hypertension, it would only apply to those claims for those, and it would be a rebuttable presumption for those. If you hurt your back on the job, you put in a workers' comp claim for a hurt back on the job, that would not have a rebuttable presumption. That would be the regular workers' comp. Also, if you did decide for the private insurance, it would be confined to just those specific cancer cases. And I'm sure that Mr. Adamson, when you suggested that a municipality we should mandate municipalities purchase private insurance, it was always intended to be just for those cases, not for all of workers' comp for a municipality. It's really limited to just those specific claims. So I think we're not proposing that a municipality now go to private insurance for all their workers' comp cases, only for those cancer cases that would fall under this particular statute.
Right. So that's why what I was thinking through is that the opt-out is not from workers' comp. The opt-out is from any cancer. What you're saying is any cancer claims under workers' comp. So you cannot bring a cancer claim under workers' comp anymore at all, because right now you still can. Right. It's just that it's very hard to prove, and it creates a lot of, on it to and fro, and they never get timely decided, right?
Just to clarify and simplify it, if I have your permission, Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Senator Kushner.
We are specifically talking about those cancers that would be listed in this statute. And we are talking about two different approaches that would make it easier for firefighters to qualify for compensation and relief from the state, from the municipality. One would be by improving the workers' comp system by making it a rebuttable presumption. So if you stay within, the municipality stays within workers' comp, for those specific cancers, it's now a better procedure for the firefighters because they have a rebuttable presumption, but not for any other kind of claim they might put in, or any other worker puts in for that matter, except if it's heart and hypertension. And so the other case is where they would opt out and say, we'll provide a comparable benefit to what they would receive under workers' comp, under the rebuttable presumption workers' comp. It is a comparable procedure and benefit through private insurance. So that we're really limiting this whole discussion, and all the recommendations are very limited. We're not proposing, this task force is not authorized to propose generalized workers' comp proposals. This is only for this cancer relief.
No, I think that's a really, I think that sums up very well that there are two options here. One is to go rebuttable. One is to offer something what Mr. Adamson had defined. And the general thinking was that one may have lower cost. And what we see in the recommendation is kind of bringing up that optionality, or giving that optionality. What I am finding difficult is that because workers' comp is not something, just as you said, we can really, everybody will still have to carry workers' comp for everything other than cancer, those specific cancer. So it would be very hard to, and again, this is for more of the legal jurist or the legal minded to really say, can you write a law where you still have to carry the workers' comp, but however, either you take a rebuttable presumption for those cancers under the workers' comp, or you basically don't get rebuttable presumption under those cancers if you have bought a private insurance just for those cancers. That's kind of, in some sense, perhaps it's possible to write a law like that, which will bifurcate the workers' comp program itself. because you're changing the workers' comp program here. But I'll leave it there because, you know, I do think there is more legal minds need to kind of figure that out then. But I understand the optionality you're thinking about. I kind of, you know, I think that's the right way to think about it. I agree with that.
Yes, and we did that as a compromise because we did hear what Mr. Adamson was saying, and we'll hear what he's saying now. He's been so patient. You have the floor.
Okay, I want to clarify a few things. This approach is only directed at cancer, not any kind of other comp coverage. And the idea was that because of the difficulty determining what was work-related, what not, 4 out of 5 cancers relate to genetics and lifestyle, that it would be better for the firefighters and everybody involved to say all cancers are covered by this other approach. So there's no fighting. You get cancer, you're covered by this. It's not these 16 or whatever, because lo and behold, there'll be somebody that's affected, and you'll have a case like the lady that came and talked about her husband passing away. We don't want to face that. All cancer should be covered, and there's no doubt for the firefighters. To do that, it's much less expensive by putting it in disability insurance, life insurance, and the critical illness policy. I don't know, in the critical illness policy, there's a $25,000 immediate for diagnosis. I'd have to check. I'm presuming that was probably taxable, as would possibly the copay, but copays are reimbursement for insurance benefits, so maybe not. Certainly the death benefit's not taxable, and disability is not taxable. But in any case, the idea was to not limit anybody and say, well, is there any doubt of whether you're covered? If they get cancer, they're covered no matter what. This is a lot less expensive. And, you know, all you'd have to do is mandates from a statute perspective that cancers are covered under this other mechanism. They're not included in comp anymore. And, you know, it's not a lot of legal involvement there. Now, the reason Mr. Morrissey was commenting about, well, what if we just mandated against the comp law, which you'd have the right to do in the state, to say that at least for cancer, medical has to be provided by healthcare insurance, since they're already doing it and they can rate every year. That's fine, but the other costs are still significant in insurance or workers' comp insurance, to project what those disability costs may be, as well as the death benefits, because as I tried to point out, when you write workers' comp and cancer happens, you have that case for the remainder of the time that person has cancer, however long it takes. An example I used was a guy that came out of remission for us, and now there's a drug that's $15,000 a month, and we're going to pay that for his life, however long that is. A disability insurer and health insurers cover what's covered this, say, calendar year, and next year they ask for more rates, and maybe the next carrier gets it. So what it does is you're rating for 1 year at a time on all those other coverages. Comp, you're basically rating for the duration. That's why there's so much more premium loaded for the unknown. You have to, or you just never survive as a comp carrier. So it's easier and more simplistic, and you're not front-ending the cost like you are in comp for this potential cancer coverage. And, you know, by doing it this way, then there's not any, as I try to point out my recent summary, which I don't know who got or who not, since some of the documents sounds like I didn't get the one on the forms. There's some inconsistency there, that the whole mechanism here is designed to make it streamline and least cost. My estimate in that last summary document is it's about 5-fold. And we can get the same benefits for firefighters. And you're not putting some municipality who, if they don't understand the cost, they may say, well, fine, I'm not buying comp now. I keep the first $500,000 and everything's wonderful. And then 3-4 years, all of a sudden, cancer rears its ugly head, and they don't understand what the true costs are. They never accrued for anything like that. And if you don't understand, it can be devastating when you know claims develop and they're significant. So I think, you know, trying to keep this a lot simpler from a legal perspective is just comp would no longer be part of cancer for firefighters would no longer be covered in comp. It would be handled through this, private solution that involves disability insurance and a critical illness policy.
Thank you. Up next, we have Rick Hart. Mr. Hart, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairwoman Porter. I've got a real problem with having the municipalities or putting into the statute that, okay, we'll cover you, but you have to use your own insurance. The municipality is going to end up paying with higher rates because the experience is going to go up. And Mr. Trapose said that, under heart and hypertension back in 1996, that was permissible. Back then, insurance was not what it is today. Today, most municipalities offer up a high deductible health insurance plan. So the employee is paying for the, whether it's 4,000 or whatever, is paying for the their own illness that they got on the job. And I just think fundamentally that's wrong. It's if there is something we could do that if they want to do that, I mean, the city's going to end up paying anyway because the experience is going to go up. They're going to see the cost of the cancer care. I mean, one PET scan is going to eat up your deductible, and now you have nothing. You have to keep saving to pay next year's $4,000 deductible. And then we haven't even broached the subject that if they have to retire as a result, I mean, I know we haven't gotten there yet, but a lot of municipalities have eliminated retiree health care benefits. So it makes it we're back in the same boat with Caroline Johnson where she's on Husky. So, I mean, we haven't really solved anything by allowing municipalities to, and what's to say we're going down a slippery slope here. They say, well, you fell off a ladder, you hurt your back, you have to use your own health insurance. We're not going to cover, you have to use that instead of the workers' comp. So I think, we're opening Pandora's box with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Adamson?
Thank you. Yeah, the idea of the health insurance, all these cancers for the past 25 years have been paid by health insurance. And okay, well, deductible has moved because medical costs have gone up. In the end, employers are across the country are sharing that cost. And all I'm saying is to put it in comp, that it brings forward all the costs over the next 7-8 years. It's a more expensive way to distribute that particular risk. I don't see that because, again, workers' comp, is designed to provide protection for injuries and pay for injured employees. The issue of cancer, when they designed the Comp Act, things like, black lung and occupational disease weren't a good fit because determining exactly what the injury was is very difficult. As we've seen here for cancer, because 4 out of 5 are not related to work, it's very difficult to define. And rather than debate that, it's much easier to have in a system where all cancers are covered. And this is a less expensive over time. I don't see, coverage creep in comp any way, shape, or form. I do think that, medical, is going to continue to rise with investing in technology and the onset of newer drugs. But comp is just a much more expensive mechanism because you've got to estimate the cost over 10 to 15 years rather than next year. And that's just a fact. It's just the way it is.
Thank you. Mr. Hart?
Yes, thank you. Through you. So you're on medication for or chemo or whatever, and you hit your limits. What happens then? I know it goes into major medical. It seems like there's a possibility of people not being able to get proper coverage and proper medication, or not proper coverage, but proper treatment. If we allow them to use their own medical insurance. That's all. Because I am not a insurance expert as by any stretch of the imagination, as you can well see. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. I see and you have to tell me because now Senator Kushner has me paranoid. Mr. Drapeau, am I saying your name correctly?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Although I like the way Senator Kushner pronounces it better, and I may adopt her pronunciation. So I guess I should have been clearer that the point I was making about using the health insurance was to save the municipality money, not to cost the firefighters money. I think it's got to be clear that they're not going to expend anything out of their pocket in the treatment of the cancer. Although Rick Hart raises another issue as to the availability of healthcare providers. In the comp system, it's actually more limited than it would be under a healthcare system in general. It's an overgeneralization, but it's an issue that I hadn't really thought about. And of course, I share his concerns about any slippery slope that would ultimately affect injured workers and injured firefighters.
Thank you. So we definitely have some things to consider and some hashing out to do. But I appreciate the robust conversation that we're having around this particular recommendation. And I'm looking, are there any further comments or questions, suggestions before we move on? All right, seeing none, we will move on to our next subsection, which is fund solvency. The task force recommends that the legislature appropriate 1.2 million to the Firefighters Cancer Relief Fund. And that number came out of what hasn't been put in the fund since it's been in statute, where it was supposed to be $400,000 per year. We do currently have the last 2 months that were put in. So we're carrying a balance of 800,000. So the 1.2 million appropriation would be retroactive, and it would make up for the annual appropriation of the difference. The legislature maintaining the annual 400,000 appropriation to the Firefighters Cancer Relief Account is needed to ensure solvency of the Firefighters Cancer Relief Fund. So the statutory requirements for the annual appropriation of 400,000 without the 1.2 million in missed annual payments would be insufficient in meeting the level of funds needed to support the long-term commitments of the fund made by the legislature. So we're trying to capture two prongs here: to catch up, right? To recapture the funds that were never put into the fund, and then going forward to make sure that every year annually there's $400,000 being put in the fund to keep it solvent. And with that, I'll go ahead and open the floor to any questions, comments, or suggestions. All right. Yes, Senator Kushner.
I just apologize to Mr. Adamson, or to Mr. Dumas, I'm sorry. I cannot find that application form. I did see your hazard report form, but I've asked my aide while we've been on here to look for it, and we have not found it. So if you wouldn't mind resending it, that would be helpful.
Okay, I sent like 6 documents. Did she only get the hazard form?
We only got the hazard form.
Okay, so, okay. I will email that out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dumas. All right, so seeing no questions there, the next subsection we have is the continuation of health insurance for the survivors. And the suggestion being made by the task force, the recommendation would be to amend section 31-284B by changing the word employee to the word claimant. And this will provide a continuation of benefits for the dependents in the instances where a firefighter dies from their illness and is thus no longer an employee. Any comments, questions, or suggestions around this particular recommendation? Yes, Mr. Drapeau.
Yeah, I just wanted to make it clear that that would only apply in the case of an accepted workers' comp claim. In other words, if the firefighter had an accepted workers' comp claim and then dies from that injury, this would allow the surviving widow to have the insurance continue. But it would not impact any situation in which there was not an accepted workers' comp claim.
Thank you for that clarification. Any further? Yes, Mr. Hart?
So to Attorney Drapeau, so if it wasn't a workers' comp claim or accepted claim, and the or the municipality went with a private insurance company, would that have any effect on that? Or are they just out of luck completely?
I'm not sure I understand the question, Rick.
So if we move this forward, everything goes as planned, and we bifurcate the insurance coverage, and a municipality opts out of the workers' comp portion and gets a private insurance plan to cover cancer, would this affect, or this change in the statute, would this still cover them with the continuation of the insurance benefits, or is it just specifically for workers' comp?
Well, I guess I'll defer to Senator Kushner.
Let me jump in, because I think the reason we drafted the way we did, the issue of comparable, private insurance would have to be comparable. So under the language that we would draft in the statute, anything that we do to change the statute with regard to firefighters coverage for cancer, those particular cancers or cancer in general, but the private insurance and what we're talking about here is for those particular cancers. If they purchased private insurance, it would have to be comparable to the benefits they would receive. So I would argue, Rick, or Captain Hart, I should say, Chief Hart. I gotta get used to calling you Chief. I would say that the private insurer would be obliged to provide the same coverage, including that change that we make to workers' comp.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Any further questions or comments, suggestions? I ain't seeing none. Next, under subsection volunteer firefighters. No. So we are suggesting amend the definition of employer to ensure coverage of all Connecticut volunteer fire departments and volunteer ambulance departments by OSHA. Federal OSHA has determined that it does not have jurisdiction over volunteer fire departments in Connecticut, nor volunteer ambulance companies because of their affiliation with municipalities, and their jurisdiction is limited to private entities. So without this change to the definition of employer, certain volunteer fire and ambulance departments will not be held accountable under either state or federal law. The change in definition is critical because it's going to ensure prevention methods are fully implemented across all fire departments in the state of Connecticut, because with OSHA will then be able to protect them just as they do the career departments. And then further, the task force recommends the legislature convenes a task force of volunteer firefighters whose task would be to study the best way to provide the cancer relief benefits to nearly the 20,000, yes, volunteer firefighters who bravely serve and protect the state of Connecticut. And this is getting back to some of the things that came up around the volunteer firefighters. So I will start, as I see Representative Aurora, you have the floor. You're on mute. You're muted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. I had actually two questions. One, I agree. I think this is a lot more contentious because it did come up on the floor, and I know there's some members who feel very strongly about about keeping certain volunteer companies, under other jurisdictions, and I think I'm not even fully. Generally speaking, I agree with the idea, but I do think it has got more problems with many other members, and so we will have to think through that a little more. And so I will leave that alone there with that comment. But I wanted to also point out something else that just came to my mind, that if we are going to make firefighters or the fire departments subject to either or, just as you said, and let's assume for a moment that as long as it doesn't change the insurance for normal workers' comp premiums, let's assume that a fire department or many fire departments elect to buy some specific insurance for covering these cancers. In that case, how does it work with the current fund? Because there is a coverage there. And I think the whole idea would be, my thinking was that we should use the state money of $500,000 or $1 million, which we are talking about here, to help our fire departments to buy the insurance by paying 10% or whatever it be. But what I'm seeing is that the benefits here are, we are not changing the existing relief fund. And so does that really mean that on one side, the relief fund will be paying some amounts, and at the same time, there will be this insurance as well to the level which we are talking about, which fire departments would be having to buy? Is that kind of solving the problem, or is it like having two solutions? And do you see where what I'm thinking here? Because I believe that if we can put some money to help some of these fire departments, we will solve the problem, because they will be incented to really buy the insurance. And by the way, if the insurance, if others are right and the workers' comp insurance doesn't go up that much, just goes up by $20, then they would just all take workers' comp, and then that problem is solved the other way. But if the workers' comp with the rebuttable presumption is up the roof, then they'll say, well, we'll take the normal workers' comp, but we'll buy this extra insurance. But I'm saying, how does this now kind of include in the framework the current relief fund, which also is giving out certain aid? Is there a duplication going on here?
I'm not sure if I follow you. And if there's someone that is following him, please, yes, Senator Kushner. You're muted.
That's tricky. I think that there is a likelihood, if the insurance is as seamless as we've heard from Mr. Adamson, that in the case where there was private insurance provided, there might not be an expenditure from the fund. However, we do know, even with the rebuttable presumption, that there are still going to be considerable delays in processing a workers' comp case. And so I think that the fund would be then used to, address those, as it was originally intended, I think, to address those needs of that firefighter and their family in an immediate way. So while they're processing their claim, they would be getting compensation from the fund that would then be repaid to the fund if their claim was established as a workers' comp case. And so I think that's how, I think that's important, because I think the amount of money we're talking about each year is not, it's not a huge amount of money. So I think that, if we start using that money to pay for premiums, I'm not sure it's a significant enough amount to really address the need or to incentivize in the way you've discussed. I'm not sure incentivize is the right word. It's just because I think we're really saying you're required to get it and the state's going to pay for part of it. So, but it's a pretty small part. So I don't think, I think that if a lot of the municipalities purchase the private insurance and it paid very quickly, as has been suggested, then I'm not sure that those places would take from the fund. If we found after a few years that this was working so well that we didn't need $400,000 a year in the fund, I'm sure the legislature would come up with another way to spend that money too.
Madam Chair, that's my worry. That's my worry. But my suggestion was, what I'm thinking here is basically that perhaps, there is a reason to give Mr. Adamson's idea, a full scope, perhaps as a pilot for, maybe for a couple of years or whatever it may be, because it looks like a really good value for money. And that's why, because his numbers were like $4 million for the entire, or $3 or $4 million for the careers, and maybe $8 or $9 million if there were for everyone. And part of it has to be borne by the municipalities. But to the extent that we throw in a little bit, I would think, it would really make it work. And it doesn't have any issue. There is no, in a sense, to prove that someone has a cancer is not obviously if they didn't have a cancer, then there would be no discussion, right? So that's already proven. So there is no debate here, because if you have a cancer, you get paid, period. Right. So there is if you get a bad insurance company, you don't get paid, but hopefully that's a different kind of problem, and they are all regulated. So I maybe perhaps after looking at the optionality, I feel that the elegant solution might be just offer the solution one and make everybody kind of do it, and the dollars look right, but I'll just leave it there.
Thank you, Representative. Mr. Dumas?
Representative Porter, regarding what you read with OSHA and the volunteer fire department, so I didn't have that in an email document. I don't know if that was emailed out to everybody, if I could get a copy of that. But some research back in, I believe it was around 2010, 2011, there was a volunteer fire department that failed to allow OSHA to come in and do an inspection after a volunteer firefighter complained. And then later, I just pulled up, there's a 2015 bill that was passed requiring all volunteer and volunteer ambulance companies to comply with OSHA. So I don't know if that relieves that concern that you had about them not having control, but it requires us to comply with all OSHA standards.
Okay, I was unaware of that, but yes, Senator Kushner, I see you wanted to respond.
Well, I only joined the legislature in 2019, but I know that the Department of Labor has each session put forward a bill that would clarify, because of a case in Connecticut that said that the volunteer firefighters were not covered by OSHA. And so I know that bill has been before, as Representative Aurora stated, has been before us on each year. I have had an opportunity to talk with the volunteer fire departments in my district, and they all would like to have OSHA coverage because they see it as an important tool for them in terms of training and the other benefits of being covered by OSHA. So they don't have penalty, they see it as a benefit. And so I think that we've been talking here so much about the value of making sure that our volunteer firefighters, and I appreciate that you've been a leading proponent of this and have brought it to our attention repeatedly, that they need to have complete protection as much as the career firefighters do. So I think that's why we came to the conclusion it'd be good to put it in here.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Any further questions, comments, or suggestions? All right, seeing none, we will move on. And it looks like we are coming up on our final recommendation. And this is something that we have been talking about that really came out of, well, we talked about it, but then the wife, the widow that came before us also brought this to our attention. And this would be to bridge pension benefits. And the suggestion or recommendation that we're making is that the legislature should look at and strongly consider proposals for the bridging pension benefits for instances where the pension maturity or number of years of service required to receive a pension is not met because of work-related illness or death. And in this case, as it relates to cancer. Any comments, questions, or suggestions on this final recommendation for the task force? All right. We actually got through one with no recommendations, no suggestions, no comments. All right, so we have had a very robust discussion on what has been presented as recommendations. There are certainly some things that we're going to go back and tweak as we take those things into consideration, what I would ask the members here, because we were scheduled to meet our final meeting on Tuesday, February the 9th. What we are asking is if we can, I see my co-chairs. Yes. Would you,
It's February 8th. I just wanted to point out.
oh yes, Wednesday, February 9th is when I got session on the brain. So you guys gonna have to forgive me for that. February 9th is, yeah, on the brain. But February 8th was the original date that we were supposed to come back for our final meeting with this task force. So we're wanting to know if we could do it on Monday, February 7th, same time, so that we could have an opportunity to bring all this stuff back together and compile final recommendations and present those final recommendations for a vote. So and I think it would be easiest just to do this by show of hand. And I saw you raise your hand, so I'm going to let you speak now, Mr. Smith, and then we can.
Thank you, Representative. I'm unavailable for Monday at the same time. I have a labor management meeting up at the state office at that same time.
Okay.
Can
So
I make a suggestion, Representative?
sure,
Ford?
absolutely.
I think that if we have to, we'll stick with Tuesday. We just wanted to we'll be voting on these recommendations, and we just wanted to make sure, since we're responsible for finalizing the report before the 9th, that, the folks who are going to be, if there's any changes, they might need some time to incorporate them. But I think it's really important that task force members are available. So if you could tell us, if you're not available, if you could just send it to Devin and then we'll figure it out. If you're not available on the 7th between 12 and 3, is there another time, like at 10 to 2, 12, 10 to 12 or something like that on that day? I can just tell you, we have a meeting, another task force that will be meeting at 3 o'clock that day. So 3 to 5 is not an option. But if folks could tell us for Monday and Tuesday when they might be available.
I think
figure it out.
I think because we're already scheduled to meet on Tuesday, that should be a given, right? We were scheduled to meet, we had already designated Tuesdays for these meetings. So it is my assumption that the members are available for that day. So the question that I'm asking is, and we already know that Mr. Smith is not available, and we would like for everybody to be present. So I figure we just move on and keep it on the Tuesday, so that we can make sure that everybody is available.
I agree.
Yeah, I think that's the best route, because we don't want anyone missing, and we do have a conflict on Monday, and that was not the original plan. So we will go back to the original plan. So we will be meeting, our last task force meeting will be a week from today, which is Tuesday, February the 8th. And this task force for the study cancer relief benefits for firefighters will be at 12 noon. And I guess the only thing I will suggest or ask before we go ahead and adjourn the meeting is that you all, whatever, recommendations or suggestions that we've added or talked about that came from you, if you would just make sure that you get those to Devin so that we can take a look at everything and then compile a final list of recommendations for the task force to vote on the 8th. Yes, Mr. Adamson, you have the floor. You're muted.
It's a great suggestion to have everybody, if they've got additional comments or thoughts, to pass on to you, but it'd be helpful to get the material the day before. I got today's recommendation is probably 45 minutes before the meeting. And while I can read fast, it's nicer to have some time to think about things.
Absolutely.
And this is obviously there's been a big discussion. There's a lot to think about here, and to give everybody a fair opportunity to digest what's ever being recommended, it would be helpful to get it the day before.
Absolutely. And I will make it, I will shoot for one better. I will ask if you guys can get that information in by the close of this business week, that we will get it out to you by Friday. I think that's doable. And then you'll have the weekend to kind of mull over it Monday, and then we reconvene on Tuesday. All right, so I am going to give folks an I'm sorry. Oh,
Just one question.
she's pointing and I'm like,
Point of screen. Senator Kushner, did Devin receive the documents? I emailed them right after you mentioned it. Did they?
Devin, can you let us know if you received the documents that Mr. Dumas just emailed?
Yes, I did.
All right,
Okay.
great. Thank you so much for resending those. We appreciate that. So yes, please get your whatever you have brought to the table in addition to what we've recommended here today to Devin before Friday, and we will get that compiled and out to you so that you'll have ample time to review them before our reconvening on Tuesday. And with that, I will give final remarks to my co-chair, Senator Kushner, to be followed by Representative Aurora.
I just want to thank everyone for their participation today. We got through a lot of information, all of which was gathered from all of you over the course of our task force meetings. And I feel pretty comfortable that we're going to be in a position to adopt recommendations next week. And that's because of all the work that you've done. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Representative Aurora.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I echo Senator Kushner's comments. A lot's got done. I think we're getting closer to what I think most of us will be comfortable with. And I look forward to next week for the final meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. And no need for me to belabor that. I agree. I with absolutely all that's been said, and just want to thank each and every one of you for making the time to make this happen. And the time is now 1:41 p.m. We got done 19 minutes early. So I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting and wish you all a very blessed day. Stay safe.